From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. My guest today is Risa August, a woman who for much of her life was so active and adventurous, people used to ask her, "Is there anything you can't do?" Risa was very fit physically and often went on multi-day excursions that tested the limits of her endurance and persistence. Eventually, though, she started to feel off, more tired and out of breath than she would normally be. This sent her into a new adventure of sorts, a different life with restrictions that forced her to ask herself a new and very different question: what is it that I can do? It turns out she discovered many things she can still do, and much of this is chronicled in her terrific memoir, The Road Unpaved, Border to Border with a Brain Tumor and a Bike. Risa's website describes her as an inspirational speaker, author and writer, Gestalt practitioner, creativity coordinator, and igniter of dreams. And from reading her book and speaking to her here, I can see how all of these descriptions fit. I hope you enjoy this blue sky conversation with Risa August as much as I did. Risa August, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Thank you for having me, Bill. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you have an amazing story, and I am pleased to say I've had a chance to read your terrific book. We will talk quite a bit about that and what's in it, of course. And much of your story tends to revolve around a pretty serious health challenge that you've had. I'd like to start our conversation before that, because I think it illustrates just how dramatic this was for you. You were an incredibly active, fit, outdoors, getting after it kind of person. Can you describe what your life was like before your health turned on you?
Yes. Well, it's interesting reflecting back. I would have called myself an extreme overachiever and perfectionist. But I was an Ironman athlete and an endurance athlete. I really loved mountain climbing and CrossFit. Everything had like this intense air about it. Like even yoga, like I did hot yoga, which if anyone listening has done hot yoga, it's pretty intense. So that was kind of my mindset. And then I was also a perfectionist. Like I had to do everything perfectly well. And I would be happy for other people's, accomplishments, but then I wanted to be better at them. And so yeah, I was just kind of very rigid in my beliefs. I was rigid in the way I lived my life. And it's just, I laugh now looking back, and there's nothing perfect about my life now.
Right. Yeah. So that sets the tone well, because it would have been, I think it was around 2018 or 19 when things changed. You started having some strange symptoms. It seemed that doctors had trouble getting their arms around it. Could you describe that, and then eventually what you were diagnosed with and what that meant for you?
Yes. Well, things started getting weird after my first Ironman race in 2010. And about 7 months later, my friend's like, "Hey, I'm doing this 500-mile bike ride around Oregon. Do you want to go?" And I'm like, "Heck yeah." And so she's like, "Don't worry. You just did an Ironman. You're going to be fine." In the meantime, from the time I did my Ironman and when this 500-mile ride was less than a year apart, I had put on maybe 30, 40 pounds, despite still being very rigid in my diet. And I was really struggling to kind of excel at my training. I was struggling with recovery. I was getting more tired quickly. And so that was kind of when it all started. And so fast forward 7 years from then, and things were progressing. There were changes in hair growth and even bone structure, weird bone spurs throughout my body, just very strange, unusual things, and fatigue, um, and I think a lot of people were thinking, "Oh, well, you're just overeating and you're in denial," and doctors were just like, "I don't know, you're an athlete, you're fine, your blood work's fine." And so it was kind of like almost 8 years of being told you're fine, you're fine, you're fine, and me knowing something is not fine. I, I just knew it in my soul. Something was not fine.
And so you had to really advocate and stay after it. And then finally, and you're going to have to help me pronounce acromegaly.
Yes, beautiful.
First try.
I know it took me 6 weeks to figure it out.
Acromegaly made, well, I actually hadn't heard the term, or if I had, I'd forgotten it. Most famously, Andre the Giant had this as well. Can you guys describe, how did they figure out it was acromegaly, and what is that, and why is it such a challenge?
I had barely finished this next Ironman race I did, um, and I had really severe headaches, and what I thought was maybe adrenal fatigue. There's even this thing called post Ironman depression, and so but these headaches would not go away, and I was barely sleeping, maybe, no exaggeration here, maybe getting 2 hours of sleep a night. Um, and so I remember going to this doctor, and I'm like, can I get an MRI? I have these severe headaches. I want to rule everything out because it seems like we tried everything. And she said, well, I don't think you need one. And I said, well, hopefully I don't, but peace of mind. And she said, no, they're expensive. You're probably not drinking enough water or overtraining. And I almost said, okay, then I guess I'll try to figure out what else it is. But something in me that day, something like some kind of divine force was like, no, you're not walking out of here without getting that MRI. And so I said, just order me the MRI. And I remember clear as day, she turned around at her computer and was shaking her head, typing on the screen, okay, but I don't think you need one. And then 1 week later, she's like, I get the results in her email, and it says, you have an enlarged pituitary, go see an endocrinologist. And that's what led to the diagnosis. And so then I'm like, what the heck's an endocrinologist? I didn't even know. I end up in her office, completely different um, than any doctor I've seen before. She was super compassionate, super caring. She gave me all the information, like all the information I could possibly need. And so first she tells me this big tumor that you're staring at on this screen right now that's crammed in between your eyeballs has to come out. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. I'm like, are you talking about brain surgery here? And she said, yes. And so there was this part of like, okay, brain surgery, but wait a minute. So is this the reason for like all the issues I was having? And then she continues on and she's like, oh, and I'm 99% certain I know what you have. You need to take one lab test and that'll confirm it. And I'm like, what? Well, yeah, I have the tumor. And so she's like, oh no, you have acromegaly. And then, like I said, it took me weeks to figure out how to pronounce it. And so that was when I first ever in my life heard of acromegaly. And still at that point, I had no idea what I was going to be facing. All I knew was, oh my gosh, this validates everything I was feeling. And then this kind of catapulted me into the work I'm doing today.
Amazing. Yeah. And I can imagine, when you're training for the kind of stuff you were training for and you're gaining 30 or 40 pounds, it just doesn't happen. And you monitor yourself, and the frustration you must have felt when people were downgrading it. It tends to happen more to women than men, frankly, where symptoms get ignored and that sort of thing. But for whatever reason, you persevered, and thank goodness, because if it had advanced much more, who knows? For most of her life, Risa was a perfectionist. When she did a sport, she did it to the max. She was fit, felt great, and was always looking out for her next challenge. But then, after experiencing unusual fatigue and weight gain, she knew something was wrong. Fortunately, she brought her persistence with her to her doctor's office and eventually got the MRI test she needed to discover her serious underlying health condition. So at this point, you've got that sort of, you're gobsmacked by this news, and it's disorienting, and everything you've known about your life. In some ways, I guess there was some reassurance, because you're like, okay, it wasn't me. There was something terribly wrong. But there's something terribly wrong. And someone told me once, when you get bad news or something happens, you can either break down or you can break out. And you, for whatever reason, didn't break down. You were committed both to taking care of what was wrong, but also continuing with your adventures and your cycling. Can you talk through that decision point, and was there ever any doubt, or how did you think about that when you got this tough news?
Oh gosh. Well, first of all, just everything you just said brings some tears to my eyes, because it really is a choice. It felt like a choice, a decision I had to make. Um, and initially I didn't really know what I was in for. So that very rigid kind of girl full of grit and perhaps a little stubborn, was like, well, I'll show you. I had a lot of doctors being like, oh, you know what this means, you're not going to be doing this or this or this anymore. So I had this part of me that was like, well, we'll see about that. And so that could be a wonderful part, that drive I always had in me. But also post surgery, post radiation treatment, when I started understanding the disease more and how destructive it really is, I remember sitting on my couch 4 or 5 months later being like, oh. And so it was a very clear decision. Well, you can live life on your terms, or you could do what everyone else is telling you should do. And so it became very clear to me I wasn't ever going to be the person I was. That was never going to, I was never going to be her again. So I had to really allow myself to be like, well, who can I be then? And so that just opened up the door to kind of this whole big life that I was missing out on. And so it was a really beautiful turning point for me. And so I made that conscious decision of like, all right, it's time to really live this time.
Amazing. Yeah. So in your book, which is The Road Unpaved, Border to Border with a Brain Tumor and a Bike, and you just sort of hit on it. You said there was a point where, because of your lifestyle before this happened, people would say on occasion, oh, Risa, is there anything you can't do? And then this happened, and you had to change your perspective and think, okay, what is it that I can do? And it seemed to me that was wildly important. And so the book, as suggested, Border to Border, it really centers on, you tell your story through this epic bike adventure that you decided you were going to do despite your illness. Tell us a little bit about what that trip was, why it was so important to you. And you'll have to touch on what Bubba was, because it's central to the story.
Yes. So, when when we all face some kind of adversity or big thing that happens in our life, I might say like it forces us to kind of reflect. At least that's what it did for me. And so it became a very reflective period of my life. And again, kind of looking back at who I was. And like you said, Rissa, is there anything you can't do? And that you can't do well too, because I always wanted to do everything perfectly. And so all of a sudden I'm like, wait a minute, who was I doing that for? Who was I being for? And now I'm like, well, who do I want to be? And I realized I was tired of kind of trying to hold up that facade of perfection and being able to do everything and anything. And so, so to me, I was like, I need something to live for that's mine. And I really want to start doing the things I always said I was going to do someday. And one of those things was a bicycle journey, a cross country bicycle journey. And that's when I found the Pacific Coast Highway cycling route from Canada to Mexico. And I was like, this is the thing that, like, I don't know why, but I was like, I'm going to get off this couch and this is the thing I'm going to do. And so really, literally in that moment, like that same day where I was having all these downloads of like, what is this life I want to live and who am I? Like that was a day I decided to sign up for this bike ride. And I didn't get clearance from my boss or from my husband. I was just doing this and it was going to be my thing and my journey. And I was doing it on my terms. And of course, it wasn't anything I expected it to be. But part of that healing journey also was about how do I connect with my body, this body that's very different than the body I had. It was functioning differently. My brain body connection was functioning differently. And I wasn't sure what to expect with it. And so I had a mentor who she was like, well, what if you were nicer to your body instead of cursing it and being like, oh, I can't believe you can't do all of the things you used to do. What if you embraced it? And, what if you named your tumor? And I was like, that is absurd. She's like, but talk nicely to it. You guys want to, kind of work together for, the desired outcome, right? And so I remember driving in my car one day and I'm like, and I'm trying on all these names for this tumor and Bubba kept coming up. And I'm like, why Bubba? That's like ridiculous. Like I wanted some really cool name. Like I wanted to come up with something, just really fun and interesting. But Bubba is what stuck. And so Bubba just kind of becomes, my partner in tow on this bicycle journey. And we have this dialogue throughout the journey. And it wasn't necessarily really me against Bubba. It was me against me. But I don't want to give too much away. But that's how Bubba became a big character and important piece of this story.
It's central in the book, and I'm wondering, and you may have just answered the question. As I was reading it, I was curious to know how much you literally have a discourse with Bubba throughout the book. Bubba will say something, and in the first part of the book, Bubba tends to be a little bit more negative and a little bit more difficult. And then again, I won't ruin anything either. But I wondered how much of that was a device for the book, or did you really live that as you were riding on this trip?
I really started having dialogue, actually like pre-surgery with Bubba. And, and so me and my group of fellow practitioners would kind of joke around, okay, it's time to retire, Bubba. Like you did your part and it's time for you to leave when you have this surgery and it's time to go. And so we would kind of joke about retirement parties and sending him off to like Turks and Caicos to retire. And so, but then he didn't leave. I find out 3 months post surgery that he decided he didn't want to retire full time, and so it had to become this whole new dialogue and this whole new, oh, it's still not gonna be quite the way I wanted it to be. And so there was, having to go through all the stages of acceptance and, okay, what now? And so yeah. So again, it's like, how do I learn to live with this? And at first it wasn't easy. And I still struggle to this day.
After her devastating diagnosis, Risa heard from her caregivers much about all the things she'd no longer be able to do. Her facade of perfection was stripped away, but she was still determined to have goals and adventures to shoot for. Enter the Pacific Coast Highway Canada to Mexico bike ride. As with past trips like this one, she'd be joined by fellow cyclists, and this time around by her new companion, her brain tumor, Bubba. Now, back to my conversation with Risa August. There's so much resilience in your story, and you were really facing the full catastrophe. I mean, your marriage wasn't great, and that was falling apart, and you're out on the road, and it's raining in your face, which helps you hide the tears. And I mean, this is like heavy, heavy stuff. And also, I guess before this, you became a Gestalt therapist, if I have that right. And I did a little research. I've heard of Gestalt before, but I didn't really understand that. I don't know if that's something you still practice, but I'm wondering how much having that training helped you get through what you've been going through. And then on this side of it all, having gone through it, does it make you a better therapist? If that's a fair way to ask the question.
Yeah. So, so I like to say, and my instructor actually said this because I was actually in training during when my diagnosis happened. And so she said, well, there's no accidents, and there's no accident that you're here during this. And so I had, for what felt like the first time in my life, a really solid support network. I never really had that from my family or in my marriage um, or even friendships. And so I had now this big solid support, and they were helping me through all this kind of experiential personal work that, just a year or two earlier, I would have been like, you all are crazy. I'm not doing any of this. And so it really has helped me become a better practitioner because I'm more patient and compassionate and curious, and there's so many different paths we can take when we butt up against like blocks or adversity or feeling stuck. And so absolutely, I feel like it all happened in as it should have.
Amazing. All right, let's talk about that better listener, because you said something in the book, and I thought I had it written down here in my notes, but I don't. So I'll try to remember as I remember it. The importance of connection with people and listening. And it's something that, it can be a stretch to try to relate it to optimism. But from the research I've done, the people I've interviewed, it does seem to me that while digital media in theory connects us to other people by the hundreds, we're actually far less connected than we were before digital media came along. And I think that's because of a lack of depth of listening and true connection. And I'd love to hear your reflections on that, because it seems like it's a very important part of what you do and what you're all about, is to really be curious, listen to people, connect with them on a personal level at a time when I think society in many ways is moving away from that. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's interesting because I used to be a very judgmental person, and I didn't understand why people didn't operate the way I did. And so as I went through training and learned about personality assessments and different types of personality and temperament, and then went on to learn more about active listening and connection, and realizing that connection is actually a top value of mine. All of that kind of came together. And so when I went on this bike tour, and I was initially, again, I don't want to give too much away, but I was initially judging all these 9 other people that were on this tour with me. And instead of just giving them a chance. And so there were several opportunities throughout my journey where I could just sit and listen, this other person would feel heard, maybe even for the first time. And then I was also getting connection out of it, and it was depthful, and people who I thought had nothing to offer me, suddenly I was getting so much out of it. And so I know that might be kind of obscure, but like, it just felt like the connection and just pausing to see someone else, to hear someone else, and to allow that depth of conversation. Oh my gosh, it was so, like, I love that so much in my life, and that's why I do this podcast, because it's
No, I related to that part of your story very directly, because I've done similar sort of endurance events. I've been thrown into groups like that one, and I suffer from being too judgmental. It's something I've really had to work on in my life. And that sort of first meeting, and you're going around saying your name and where you're from, and you're just you put everyone in this little compartment. You think you've got them figured out. They probably, they're this kind of person, they're that kind of person. But then as the days go on and you actually have conversations, you find all these things in common. You find all these total surprises. And you had that in your journey with these friends. And I can only imagine how much that's helped you in the work that you're doing. Another thing I got a kick out of in the book is you like sort of these gestures, these grand gestures, Wonder Woman and tutus and tiaras, and we got to pull over for donuts. There's something, and I don't know how much of that you had before your illness, just as an Ironman athlete, or if that came from, I'm dealing with this really tough thing. I'm going to, as you, I think, describe it, I'm going to be Risa unleashed. Is that, where did that fit? Was that something you already had in your sort of methods, or is that something that came out after your diagnosis?
Oh my gosh, that came out after post-diagnosis. Like, because I was so rigid. So if we did like a backpacking trip or a bike tour, like I was first on the road or first on the trail, or in my mountaineering days, if I heard someone else's crampons on the snow or the rock before me, I was up out of it. Like I was just so, I never really stopped to smell the roses. I never savored things. Like all I could think about was crossing the finish line, or getting to the top of the mountain, or, getting to the end or the viewpoint or whatever. And I never took time to stop, and one of the characters, the Flash in the book, he loved coffee shops. So he loved stopping along the way to have an espresso all the time. Like, frankly, I couldn't do that biking that far, but I was so determined to do this bike ride my way, and I was going to stop, and I was going to take a lot of photos, and I was going to, and this helped me like ever since. I went on to bike the Camino de Santiago in Spain, and I would connect with people, and I'd be like, sorry, I stopped to take photos. Like, so, and they would just leave me in their dust, and I didn't care, or I stopped. And so this is definitely something that came after, and thank God, thank God.
Yeah. I'm always inspired by people who are dealt a difficult hand, but play it with as much positivity, resilience, and optimism as they can muster. Risa's physical setbacks have led her to significantly change her mindset. These days, she's more patient, compassionate, and curious than she was before, and less judgmental. And on her post-diagnosis bike rides, the former go hard all the time rider is now the one declaring when it's time to stop and smell the roses, or in her case, to pull over and eat the donuts. Now, back to the final segment of my blue sky conversation with Risa August. You know, there are plenty of people around who are the way you used to be, who are just all about getting it done and achievement and not stopping to smell the roses. And they don't get a devastating diagnosis like you did. If you were advising someone like that, how can you help people who might be listening who are that way but would like to be more celebratory and more stop and smell the roses? How do you help someone think about that who hasn't been dealt the kind of blow that you were?
Gosh, yeah, I think it's really depends on the person. If they're aware of it, if they're like, gosh, I don't feel fulfilled, or I don't, um, uh, this isn't what I want to do with my life anymore, then that's my doorway in, and so, it just it starts it all starts with a question, and I think that's the magic of having guidance, whether it's a therapist or coach or counselor, is, we're here to guide you through those processes. And I'm genuinely curious. So again, it takes one potent question to get people's wheels turning. And so if they're stuck in I can't, you know, okay, well, what can you do? If they're stuck in I don't, well, what if you did know? Or, it's sometimes it's almost like playing devil's advocate. But when people ask me, what do you do? I don't necessarily say I'm a coach or a speaker or an author. I say, well, I'm in the business of inspiring other people to live without limiting their own limiting beliefs, and because ultimately that's what I feel like I'm doing. So
Amazing. So speaking of speaking, I watched your TED talk, and you there talked about this acronym you have is CAN, CAN, capable, able, now. Could you walk us through that? Because I thought that was really powerful. It's a very simple three-letter expression of your. I think it encapsulates a lot of your philosophy. So could you talk about the whole CAN idea that you have?
yes, thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for listening to my TEDx talk.
Of
I appreciate
course.
it. So so I remember being stuck on the couch again 6 months post surgery. I was binge watching another Netflix show or a cooking show, like a bake. I love baking shows, um, and and I remember thinking, this is no way to live. This isn't how I want to live. And that's when I was really stuck in I can't, and all these things I can't do anymore. And I can't take the dogs for a walk, and I will never do another Ironman again. And then my brain wasn't even functioning properly, and I was struggling with cognitive stuff, and so I was kind of stuck in that. And I just remember thinking, like, it was really a conscious moment of, well, I want to live. Like, I don't want to stay on this couch. Like, I really felt, this is going to sound dramatic, but I really felt if I stayed there for one more day, like I would die. Like, it just felt like it was slowly killing me to just be there. And so I remember thinking, well, wait a minute, what can I do? I don't have to do Ironman races anymore. Like, what can I do? And that word "can" turned into almost like a mantra for me. And I took each letter from the word "can," capable, able, now, and I'd ask myself this question: what am I capable and able to do now in this moment? And I wanted to get to the US Canadian border at that point, and I had 14 months to figure out how to do that. but like there was no way I could even get on my bike in that moment. So I had to really simplify this new complex thing I was facing. And so it really came down to, what can I do in this moment? And again, I was never a yogi. I never meditated. Like, I could not sit still. My brain couldn't be quiet for that long. So to have to simplify, and I mean, that was a new place for me.
If you're comfortable telling us, I'm curious to know, how is your health now? Where are you on the whole health journey? And then how is that impacting you? Because you've been living with this for a long time now. How does it feel now? And you've written this book and you've gotten your story out. How is everything going for Risa these days?
Yeah. So, I mean, to be quite honest, the disease is definitely progressing. The toll is becoming more and more apparent on my body physically. My mindset is just as strong as ever. And I absolutely want to live a full life, and inspire other people, continue inspiring other people to do the same. And so again, it's just navigating, okay, well, what can I do now then? I did in 2024. I think I told you I biked across northern Spain, and that was a solo journey, and it challenged me on every level. And again, I was questioning myself. Why am I doing this? Who am I doing this for? And it doesn't feel good anymore. And I remember finishing in Santiago de Compostela, and I was bawling my eyes out, but not because I was happy, but because I was so glad the ride was done. And I wanted to quit almost every day of the ride. And I would never trade that experience. But my point of all this is like, but now I'm like, okay, well, I don't have to do that anymore. And people keep asking me, well, what's the next big thing you're doing? And I'm like, I'm perusing a farmer's market on Saturday, and so and finding the joy in that. Yeah. So and not caring if it kind of disappoints other people, and just loving what I'm doing.
So how, in addition to reading the book, which I highly recommend, and I mentioned your TED Talk, how else can people learn more about you, your work, Risa Unleashed, all of that?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, risaaugust.com, and that's Risa with one S, Risa August, just like the month, .com.
Amazing. Well, I'm so glad we had this chance to talk, and I'm really glad I had a chance to read your book. And I mentioned before we started the interview that I know what it takes to write a book. I know it's very hard work, and you told a very personal story really well, and I think it's going to be really relatable to the people listening here. And I just appreciate your inspiration and all that you're putting out in the world. So thank you for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh my gosh, Bill, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for connecting.
Take care. Grappling with her acromegaly led Risa to develop her CAN framework, standing for capable, able, now. One of the things she's capable of now that she wasn't before is finding joy in different little things, like, as she says, a simple visit to the farmer's market. And this kind of grateful, celebratory mindset is something that can be good for all of us, regardless of our current health status. I hope you enjoyed this blue sky conversation with Risa August. Before you go, it would help us out a lot if you'd leave us a rating or review. And consider subscribing to the Blue Sky Podcast and following the Optimism Institute on social media to be sure you never miss a future episode. My thanks go to Crush Graphics, who's responsible for graphic design and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute. And that's Crush with a K, if you'd like to check out more of their fantastic work at crushgraphics.com. and to Sound On, Sound Off, the team behind the incredible editing and mixing of our Blue Sky episodes. You can learn more about their work at soundonsoundoff.com. Until next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.